15 spine-chilling true stories from the haunted corners of Reddit that will leave you terrified. Rachel had barely settled into the old, creaky house she once called home when the whispers began. Italo was just turning 2, and Sophie was 5, blissfully unaware of the shadows creeping across her mother's heart. The abandoned barn stood there, like a gaping maw waiting to swallow secrets, but to Rachel, it had simply been a place to stay, a retreat after losing her job in the chaotic corporate mess of city life. Now, however, those whispers mixed with the rustle of wind through dry cornfields brought a shiver that wouldn't leave her spine. At first, it was just flickers. A dark shadow moving across her peripheral vision, sending her heart racing. Was it just a trick of the light? The fatigue from nights spent working double shifts clouded her judgment, so she brushed it off. The quaintness of this sleepy Midwestern town, with its white picket fences and waving neighbors, had turned into an eerie shell. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, a weight settled on her chest, tight and suffocating. Each night after tucking the kids into bed, she'd hear them, the whispers, rising as if coaxed by the growing darkness. They crawled through the night like unseen phantoms. Panic raced through her veins like wildfire, and she shook her head to clear cobwebs of nonsense. Surely it was just an echo in the empty corners of her mind. But the anxiety piled on, thick and oppressive, until that one fateful evening when the whispers spiraled into something far worse. She ventured outside, the chill of the October air cutting through her thin pajamas, and saw them, figures melding into shadows as they danced between the trees, their laughter a macabre mimicry of children's joy. "Are you okay, Rachel?" Mr. Whitman asked the next day, his brow furrowed in concern. He offered a friendly smile, his ability to disarm the creeping dread just enough for her to feel momentarily at ease. "You've been looking a bit tired." Laughing, she brushed off his concern. "Just adjusting to the night shifts," she said with a forced smile. But his eyes glinted with a knowing that sent a chill down her spine. Then she noticed the missing children posters, paper tears etched into her memories like scars. They hung in the corners of the neighborhood, remnants of lost laughter and childhood innocence. Abandoned storefronts stood nearby, graffiti screaming warnings to stay away and promises that they're watching. The cozy safety she once felt in her hometown was unraveling, transforming the landscape into a terrifying labyrinth with no way out. As the nights wore on, Rachel could sense the old barn's pull, an unexplainable urge to seek out the boundaries of its shadows. Folklore spun tales of lost souls and hidden horrors, the voices of the past echoed louder with each tick of the clock. She could feel the weight of those stories, building into something tangible. The house felt smaller, constricting, and grappled with nightmares of her children disappearing into that abyss. When she first noticed someone watching, she barely slept that week. Night after night, hidden behind her blinds, she felt icy stares along the back of her neck. Who was out there? She tried calling the police, but her words echoed unanswered into the void. Panic clawed at the edges of her control, her thoughts spiraling, questioning each neighbor's sincerity, harmonizing with the mounting dread. One evening, she resolved to confront Mr. Whitman about what she feared had taken root in their midst. Just as she reached for the doorknob, the storm outside erupted, lightning splitting the sky. The whispers crescendoed within her until a voice pealed through the tumultuous night. Rachel, her heart pounded. The panic now swirled into a maelstrom of resolve. Who could she trust when darkness might wrap its arms around them all? The walls felt like they were closing in, and as she stood there frozen, eyes wide and skin crawling, the true nightmare was only just beginning. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as the shadows twisted and converged, obscuring the yard in haunting silhouettes. The darkness felt alive, clutching at her shoulders like icy fingers. That voice, no, it was not merely a whisper, it was a call, as if something intangible sought her attention, drawing her toward the ominous barn. With every heartbeat, dread fueled her decision. It was time to confront this fear head-on, but logic was a weak lighthouse in the storm of madness swirling inside her. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled as she turned toward the door. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to scoop up her children and drive far away, anywhere but here. But curiosity gnawed at her, consuming reason. Just as she slammed the door shut behind her, the wind howled, and the whispers grew louder. Rachel, they echoed in the recesses of her mind. They sounded familiar, drawing on threads of memory that stretched into her childhood. Hadn't she heard those voices before? The connection twisted in her gut like a knife. She stepped outside, her feet crunching on the gravel, the grounding sound swallowed by the night's impending darkness. Raindrops started to fall, punctuating the silence with an eerie rhythm. The barn loomed ahead, its weathered wood slick with moisture. Something about it felt wrong, alive. She took a step closer, drawn by a force she couldn't comprehend, her heart pounding with every inch. "Stay away from there," came a voice from the darkness. Rachel whipped around, skin crawling at the sudden intrusion. It was Mrs. Eldridge, their neighbor, pale and wide-eyed, clutching her shawl around herself. The ominous glint of fear in her eyes sent a fresh wave of panic through Rachel. "Why? What's in there?" Rachel couldn't help but ask, voice trembling. "You don't want to know." Mrs. Eldridge's eyes darted toward the barn. "Children go missing." The whispers, her voice broke, raw and trembling. "They say they lure you in. You can't trust them, Rachel. Please, don't go." But those whispers weren't just words to Rachel anymore, they were like a siren's call, promising forbidden secrets, and sweet resolution to her growing dread. With a curt nod, Rachel brushed past Mrs. Eldridge and made her way to the barn, feeling the pulse of her heart reverberate in her ears. Pushing the heavy doors open, she stepped inside. The musty smell enveloped her, and the air thickened with a chill that sunk into her bones. Shadows danced in the flickering light of her phone, illuminating old tools and memories of a life forgotten. The corners seemed to whisper more now, soft and sweet, as they beckoned her deeper into the dark. As she moved cautiously inside, a soft sobbing emerged, echoing off the wooden walls. Her heart raced. "Italo? Sophie?" She called out, desperately hoping her children might be playing a cruel joke. But the sorrowful cries danced further down the barn, beckoning her toward the shadowed recesses. Then she saw them, two small figures huddled together, their faces illuminated by a weak beam of light. Relief washed over her momentarily until she noticed the unnatural stillness, how their eyes were wide, void of recognition. "Mommy!" They croaked, their voices trembling as they pointed beyond her, their terror palpable. Rachel turned slowly, dread slithering up her spine as the corners of the barn darkened even more. The laughter returned, louder now, echoing like a sinister symphony. Figures wrapped in darkness shifted, their shapes twisting into grotesque inversions of her children. "Join us," they hissed, their mouths stretching into impossible grins. Rachel's instinct to flee surged. But in that moment of terror, she froze. An overwhelming force pulled at her, dragging her toward the figures. As panic clawed at her throat, she remembered it wasn't just her safety she had to consider anymore. "Stay away from my children!" she screamed, lunging forward to shield them. But was there still time? What waited in the shadows beyond, ready to swallow them whole? Just then, the whispers surged into a cacophony of cries, drowning out her thoughts in a chilling chorus. Rachel felt a weight dragging her backward, toward that darkness where no light could reach. In that fleeting moment, she realized she wasn't just facing the barn, she was staring into a nightmare that had already begun unfolding. What would she have to sacrifice to save her children? And who was waiting on the other side of the darkness? As she stood there, hearts pounding and breaths shallow, a terrifying thought struck: what if running wasn't enough? What if the true horror lurked far closer than she could ever imagine? Rachel felt the walls of the barn closing in on her, a claustrophobic prison of darkness and whispered promises. The air thickened, every breath a struggle as the cacophony of voices seemed to claw at her sanity. With her children clutched tightly to her, Rachel pushed her way through the fog of fear, her instincts laser-focused on shielding them from whatever malevolence brewed in the shadows. "Mommy, they're coming!" Sophie whimpered, her small body trembling against Rachel. It took all her strength not to scream, but the urge bubbled up, strangled by sheer panic. "Stay close," she commanded, digging her fingers deeper into her kids' hands. "It's going to be okay." But even as she said it, doubt writhed in her mind. The figures shifted, darker now, swirling like storm clouds around the barn. They seemed to undulate, a horrifying dance of shadows vying for her attention, pulling her gaze toward their impossibly wide grins. Echoes of laughter bounced off the wooden timbers, a mockery of innocence filled with something dreadful. It was as if the barn itself breathed, exhaling whispers seeded with dread, wrapping around her like cold tendrils. "Join us," they chanted, their voices layered and oppressive, sweet yet laced with malice. Rachel stumbled back, instinctively shielding her children with her body, dread coiling tighter in her stomach. Then, like a lightning bolt of desperation, she remembered the old legends her grandmother used to tell about whispers that called out to the lost, forfeit souls tangled in a web of darkness that devoured the living. The stories never felt real until now. "Don't listen to them," she yelled defiantly, her voice cutting through the din. "We're leaving. Now." She turned, her mind racing as she scanned the gloom for an escape route. Each second stretched as she fought to drown out the hissing, the seduction of the voices thrumming against her brain. With a shove, she propelled her children toward the barn doors. The laughter and pleas for attention swelled again, sharper, more insistent. "Stay with us," they echoed as the figures began to solidify, advancing now with lengths of shadow toward her and the kids. But the door was ajar, its age-worn hinges groaning like a death knell. Rachel felt a sliver of hope surge in her chest. She wrestled the door open wider, the darkness swirling hungrily around her ankles as if trying to drag her back. "Run!" she cried, pushing Sophie and Italo ahead of her, ready to follow, but as they took a step forward, Rachel froze. It was too quiet. The cacophony had diminished to a haunting silence, the shadow forms stilled, as if they were waiting. She dared to look back, terror pooling in her gut. Those grotesque faces had shifted, twisting into something new. They no longer resembled her children, instead, they were monstrous, warped reflections of the innocence she held. "Mommy, are they us?" Italo whispered, his voice trembling with unsteady fear. An icy dread pooled in her chest. "Don't listen. Just keep going," she ordered, hoping that her legs would obey, but each step forward felt like wading through thick mud. An unseen force heavy with sorrow and longing pulled them backward, urging them to turn. In her heart, Rachel felt the suffocating weight of an ancient evil, fingers of despair wrapping around their throats, threatening to crush the hopeful fire that glimmered within them. Then the whispers returned, louder, relentless, 1,000 voices chanting her name. A pulse in the walls echoed it back, pushing Rachel to her limit. Desperation clawed at her throat as she turned back once more, the twisted figures now inches away. "Leave us alone!" she cried in defiance, arms spread wide, ready to protect her children from whatever horror awaited, but just as she faced the darkness, the barn erupted into a tempest of shadows, swirling and howling, as terrifying eyes glimmered in the depths, drawing closer to their trembling forms. Just then, a hand reached from the darkness, cold and powerful, wrapping around Rachel's wrist. "Rachel," it breathed, its voice a chilling echo familiar yet forbidding. The cold seeped into her, and it struck her like lightning. "You can't escape what has already taken root in your heart." Panic surged again as she felt the grip tightening, pulling her deeper into the dark. Was fear enough? Would love blind her to the peril ahead? As the darkness closed in, she heard one final whisper out of the chaos, one she never expected. Welcome home. Where did she truly belong now, with the shadows or with the light? And what was the darkness willing to claim to keep her? The grip around Rachel's wrist tightened, sending a frigid wave coursing through her body. The shadows seemed to solidify, forming grotesques that eclipsed the remnants of her reality. Her heart pounded, each beat a drum of desperate anger mixed with primal terror. "Let go of me!" she screamed, thrashing wildly. But the more she struggled, the tighter that chilling grasp became. It felt as if the darkness had teeth, gnashing at her will, eager to swallow her whole. "Mommy!" Sophie's terrified voice cut through the storm of chaos. Rachel's blood ran cold as she saw her daughter, her innocent child, torn between her mother and the looming specter of darkness. Italo stood frozen, eyes wide, mouth trembling but no sound escaping. "Stay away from them!" Rachel screamed, pulling fiercely, trying to break free from the heavy weight that threatened to consume her. The shadows hissed, a sound like unleashing wind, filling the barn with echoes of something ancient and terrible. "Join us, Rachel," the voice still echoed, now soft and seductive. "We've been waiting for you." Rage bloomed in her chest, anger tinged with tear-soaked desperation. "We are not yours," she yelled back, her voice raw and defiant, though the quaver betrayed her fear. The grip on her wrist faltered for just a second, and that one moment of uncertainty sparked a flicker of hope. She cast a glance back towards her children, their faces pale and filled with confusion. "Run! Now!" she shouted. As Sophie and Italo took hesitant steps toward the door, Rachel yanked against the strength holding her. She felt a pop. The connection between her and the shadow shattered. The sudden release set her tumbling backward, but Rachel caught herself, launching her feet forward. She dashed toward the pair, her heart racing like wild hooves echoing through the barn, but the shadows rallied, darting towards her children, blocking their escape. The laughter grew louder, a dissonant melody of mockery that sent chills through her spine. Rachel stumbled, the barn floor sticky with old hay, pulling her legs down like quicksand. "Don't!" she called, trying to cut through the chaos. But the door loomed, ominous and unyielding, the way out shrouded in fog and twisted shadow. Even the crack's tiny beams of hope seemed to dim, driven back by the encroaching darkness. Then finally, with a violent burst of energy, Rachel reached her children. She shoved them toward the door, urgency fueling her every move. But a cold haze clung to the air, wrapping around her like a shroud. Closer now, the figures had transformed into a swarm, their faces contorted in shades of agony and glee, pooling around her family in a grotesque embrace. "Mommy!" Italo whimpered, the plea filling the cavernous space, pulling Rachel's heart into a vortex of despair. I don't want to go, trust me," she shouted, wrapping her arms around them, anchoring them to the warmth of her love. Each second felt like hours, as they shivered under the eerie glow of the sinister forms. She could feel the weight of their yearning and torment, pushing against her mind, digesting her resolve. With every ounce of strength she had, Rachel screamed, "We will not join you." One step at a time, she forced them toward the door. Just as they reached the threshold, the shadows lunged, tendrils darting through the air like serpents of fear. They wrapped around Rachel's ankles, yanking her down, their haunting whispers mingling with her heartbeat. "Stay, come back, don't leave, you belong." Rachel fought back, pulling her children with her as they crashed through the barn door, spilling into the cool night air. The shadows recoiled with a screech, swirling and condensing behind them, trapped within the barn's dark thresholds. Breaths escaped Rachel in heavy, gasping waves, both from the cold seeping into her skin and the pure relief that they had made it outside. Yet, the victory felt hollow. The fear at her back left a void in her gut, whispering of the inevitability to come. "Mommy!" Sophie breathed, staring wide-eyed, the barn's looming structure gaping behind them. "Are we safe?" Italo asked, panic fluttering in his voice. Rachel looked back, dread pooling in her stomach. The barn remained, silent but watchful, shadows swirling just out of sight now. "I don't know," she murmured, her throat aching. "But we have to keep going." They turned away, trembling, hearts racing under the veil of night. But even as their shoes crunched on the gravel, the faintest of whispers began to trail behind them, threading through the quiet night with a promise that made her blood run cold. "Rachel!" The wind carried it, a haunting in the air like an uninvited guest. "What do they want?" Sophie's voice trembled, barely a whisper. Rachel's mind raced, every instinct telling her this wasn't over, that the darkness was merely biding its time. As they pressed on into the night, the murmurs shifted from behind them to the very depths of her thoughts. "Come play," it echoed, twisting through the silence like a ghostly hand reaching out. How far could they run before the darkness came for them again? And what would it take to finally escape the shadows that cradled her heart? Fingers of icy dread curled around Rachel's heart as they moved further away from the barn, the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves filling her lungs. With every step, the darkness seemed to stretch and slither, shadows casting shapes that flickered at the edges of her vision. She knew they weren't safe yet, she could feel it in her bones. "Mommy, I'm scared," Sophie's voice quivered, pulling Rachel from deepening thoughts. The girl clung to her mother's side, her small hand squeezing with an urgency that felt like a reminder of their fragile connection. "It's okay, sweetheart," Rachel whispered, tension tightening her throat. "We just need to keep moving." She glanced back only to see the barn standing like a great dark sentinel, defiant against the moonlight, almost as if it were watching them. They traversed through the overgrown path leading into the woods, the scratching of branches echoing the whispers vibrating in her mind. Every rustle made her pulse race, every snap of twig beneath their feet felt like a warning. Rachel fought off the sense of being followed, but the weight of unseen eyes bore down on her shoulders, heavy and suffocating. "Why did they want you?" Italo's voice broke through the suffocating silence, a touch of innocence mixed with fear. It gripped her heart, making her want to shield him from whatever horrors lay ahead. "I don't know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to let them take us." A sudden chill swept through the trees, rustling the leaves like nervous energy. The wind carried a familiar whisper, soft yet sharp enough to slice through the darkness. "Rachel, join us," Rachel stumbled, feeling the breath leave her lungs. The insatiable call clawed at her sanity, a melody woven with the frayed edges of fear and temptation. She pressed her palm against her chest, heart drumming so fast she feared it might burst, a reminder that they were running from something real, something that would not let go easily. "Mommy!" Sophie cried again, her voice laced with despair. The tension shot through Rachel, an electric jolt that ignited her protective instincts. She hurried forward, yanking the children closer. "We can't listen. We need to keep going, please." But the shadows began to coil tighter around them, creeping in from the darkness like fingers reaching to ensnare them. The deeper they ventured into the woods, the stronger the whispers grew, clawing at Rachel's mind, filling her with doubt. "What would happen if we stay?" Italo whispered, fear creeping into his voice as they slowed down, an unintentional halt. "No." Rachel snapped, the sharpness of her tone shocking even herself. "We can't think like that." She took a deep breath, forcing courage into her voice. "What happened back there? Those were illusions. They want us to falter. Just tell us what to do, Mommy." Sophie tugged at Rachel's shirt, the innocence in her eyes mingling with panic. Rachel felt a rush of emotions swirling in her chest: fear, love, and a fierce determination. "Just follow me. Keep your eyes on my back." As they picked up the pace again, darting through the thickets, the air thickened around them, each step heavy with impending doom. Flashes of shadow flickered to the corners of her vision. For every rustle of the wind, she could hear the echoing laughter from the barn, a taunt that pierced through her resolve. The moon hung overhead like an indifferent observer, casting eerie light onto the winding path ahead. Twisted roots reached out like skeletal fingers, threatening to trip them, as if the forest itself conspired against their escape. "Where are we going?" Sophie asked, desperation clinging to her voice. "To find help," Rachel lied, though she herself felt utterly lost. "We just need to keep moving." But even she couldn't shake the feeling that safety was an illusion, and the darkness was still lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. Suddenly, a figure darted through the trees, a flash of white that halted Rachel's breath. Her heart raced as she turned to look, half expecting a monstrous shape to break through the foliage. "Mommy!" Italo's scream echoed behind her. Rachel spun around, and that s when she saw it, a twisted face emerging from the darkness, a smoky silhouette wrapping around Italo. The whispering soared to a crescendo, all around them like a cacophony of anguished voices. "Come play with us!" Fighting back a surge of panic, Rachel darted forward, but the shadows swarmed, wrapping around her feet, dragging her down to the forest floor. "No! Not him!" With every ounce of strength, she pulled herself free, heart pounding as she lunged for Italo, her fingers reaching desperately. The grotesque figure loomed closer, the air heavy with malevolence. "Help!" Italo squeaked, eyes wide with terror. "Hold on to my hand!" Rachel screamed, desperation tearing at her throat. She felt the shadows closing in, felt the cold tendrils wrapping around her, darkness hungry to claim her whole. Just as her fingers grazed Italo's arm, the figures began to blur, shadows melding into one another, spreading like a dark sea. In that moment, with the fabric of reality beginning to warp and twist, Rachel knew there were no more options left. "Run!" she yelled, the words shredded with urgency. They were in a race against time, against the dark. How could they break free when the darkness had fed on their fear all along? But as they dashed deeper into the forest, a single thought pierced through the veil of chaos: would they escape, or simply run straight into the waiting arms of their fates? And then there was a moment, a heartbeat where silence threatened their frantic breaths. Then, from the void of shadows, came a rumble deep within the earth, shaking the forgotten woods. "Run faster!" Rachel demanded, but the scream swallowed whole by the encroaching darkness that surged forward, hungry to reclaim what had escaped. The ground trembled beneath them, the vibrations palpable, sending shivers through Rachel's spine. Panic surged like icy water in her veins. "We have to move!" she cried out, urgency sharpening her voice. With no clear path forward, her instincts kicked in, and she sprinted deeper into the underbrush, branches clawing at her clothes, daggers of the night trying to hold her back. Sophie trailed behind, whining softly, "Mommy, I can't keep up. Just a little farther." Rachel panted, her breath coming in short gasps. Her heart thundered, each beat a drum echoing the distant whispers that filled the trees, the eerie calls taunting them with every step. "Stay close. I won't let anything happen to you." But even as she shouted, doubt gnawed at her, a hungry fear that slithered through her mind. The forest thickened, darkness folding in and wrapping around them like a living shroud. The air turned stale, oppressive, reminding Rachel of something dead. Shadows stretched longer beneath the gnarled branches, wrapping around her like desperate fingers. "Mommy," Sophie whimpered, glancing around, wide-eyed and terrified. "What if we never get out?" Rachel couldn't answer. She could only push forward, heart aching for the little girl's unshakable trust. As they dove beneath a low-hanging branch, a gust of wind swirled around them, chilling to the bone, carrying the echoes of childish laughter that seemed to come from all directions. "Join us, play forever," it begged, clawing at her sanity. "Shut it out!" Rachel snapped, anger and fear mixing on her tongue. "They're just trying to trick us." She stumbled, almost losing her footing, but the sense of danger crackled in the air like static, forcing her onward. Suddenly, the ground beneath her buckled, and she felt a sickening jolt. Rachel barely managed to catch herself, reaching out as the earth split slightly, bringing forth an eye of darkness that seemed to pulse and shimmer. "What is that?" she gasped, dread flooding through her. It was like a mouth waiting to swallow them whole. Just then, a shrill scream pierced the night, cutting through the air like a knife. Italo's. The little boy's voice rang with pure terror. Without thinking, instinct took over, and Rachel rushed back, leaving Sophie to follow closely. "Italo!" Rachel shouted, her heart bolting into her throat. "Where are you?" The darkness seemed to ripple, shadows shifting against shadows as she flailed through the branches scraping her skin in sharp protests. And then she saw him standing just outside a clearing, his small frame caught in the moonlight, trembling and wide-eyed as he faced something incomprehensible. "What are you doing?" she cried, straining to reach him. His eyes darted to something behind her, panic exploding on his face. "Mommy, run!" Before she could react, a low growl reverberated through the air, deep and terrible, rising from the darkness like smoke. Rachel turned, her heart seizing as she finally glimpsed what had been lurking just out of sight, a creature of shadows, its form twisting like a nightmare, teeth like shards of glass catching the moonlight. It lurched toward her, eyes gleaming with malice, intent on consumption. "Join us forever," it hissed, voice slithering through the air thick with fear. "Don't move!" Rachel shouted as instincts fought for control, body readying for flight or fight. But frozen horror gripped her. "Mommy!" Sophie cried, stepping forward against the pull of Rachel's desperate commands. "I'm scared. Get back!" Rachel yelled, shoving her daughter behind her with every ounce of strength, dread flooding her veins. They were outnumbered, surrounded by chaos, but she wouldn't let them take her children. Not now. The creature cocked its head, curiosity almost playful, but with malice twisted beneath its gaze. As Rachel pondered how to escape, something cold and heavy clawed at her from behind, something darker than the living shadows that threatened to swallow them whole. How do we fight something like this? The question echoed in her mind as the creature crept closer, hunger radiating from its every fiber. In that despair, she felt something inside her flicker, an ember reigniting an instinct to protect that burned fiercely. Suddenly, she lunged forward toward the terrible form, determination flooding her heart. "Run! I'll hold it back." She thrust her hands, defiance ready to erupt from her fingertips, but then, just as it seemed the darkness would claim one of them, a blinding light burst forth from the depths of the forest behind them, illuminating the horror and casting shadows away. "What is that?" Italo gasped, shielding his eyes. Rachel froze, fear mingling with awe, lips parting in disbelief. In that moment, would they find salvation, or had they unwittingly opened another door to an even deeper horror lurking beyond? And then the light blinked out, leaving them once again engulfed in darkness. Rachel's heart raced as the darkness swallowed them whole once again, leaving only the echo of dread behind. The creature lingered, its twisted form hidden by night, but she could feel its eyes boring into her, waiting, watching. Adrenaline surged through her veins. "What just happened?" Italo whispered, voice shaking. "Stay close," Rachel urged, her throat dry. She couldn't afford to show fear, she needed to be strong for her children. "We need to keep moving." Suddenly, the laughter returned, young, innocent giggles that danced through the air like cruel wind. "Come play with us." The sound taunted, echoing between the trees, wrapping around her like a shroud. "Don't listen." Rachel snapped, squeezing Italo's hand tightly, dragging him and Sophie onward. Each step felt heavier as they ventured deeper into the abyss, the familiar gaze of the darkness haunting them. They stumbled upon a clearing, moonlight spilling like silver onto the ground. But the contrast didn't bring relief, it only amplified the shadows lurking just beyond the edge. Rachel's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of safety, any clue on how to escape. "What if they catch us?" Sophie whimpered, her small voice barely audible above the relentless calls. Rachel dropped to one knee, looking her daughter in the eye. "We will be okay. I promise. Just stay with me. We can't let them win." Without warning, the ground trembled again, sending vibrations coursing through her body. She glanced down to see small cracks spiderwebbing towards them, as if the earth itself wanted to swallow them whole. A sickening thought slithered into her mind: what if they weren't meant to escape? "We need to go, now," Rachel shouted, her voice firm against the rising chaos. They touched the edges of the clearing, ready to dart back into the trees when something emerged from the shadows. A figure tall and grotesque stepped forward, illuminated only by the flickering light of the moon. Its body seemed to ripple, a skin stretched thin over a frame that was all wrong, limbs too long, a grin stretching unnaturally wide. "You think you can escape?" It cackled, voice crackling like dry leaves. Behind it, Rachel spotted a multitude of eyes blinking open, glowing from the darkness. A concert of whispers erupted, layering over each other, chanting, "Join us forever." Her breath caught in her throat. This was not just one creature, they were surrounded. "Run!" Rachel shrieked, thrusting Sophie and Italo ahead of her. The three of them bolted back into the trees, branches tearing at their clothes and skin. Behind them, the laughter rose, a cacophony of mocking delight. "Join us! The game has just begun." Rachel could feel the edges of panic clawing at her as they sprinted further into the enveloping darkness. Her heart pounded in her chest, threatening to burst. The sounds behind them grew louder, the creaturesque growl an insistent menace that pushed them from behind, forcing them deeper into the thicket, but there was something ahead, a faint glimmer, a shimmer that broke through the oppressive darkness. "What is that?" Italo shouted, pointing. Rachel squinted. "We can't stop. We have to get to it." As they approached, the light flickered once more, taking form, shifting shadows into a familiar shape. It looked like a door, or maybe an opening, a portal, as if hope could still exist. "Mommy, what if it's a trap?" Sophie said, trembling, uncertain. "It's better than being caught." Rachel barked, determination overriding fear. They surged toward it, the whispers morphing into screams of rage behind them. The moment they reached the light, it surged forward, engulfing them completely, but just as it did, the shadows recoiled, shrieks mingling with anger and despair. Rachel felt the weight of darkness trying to seep through, desperate to pull them back, and then silence. A breath held in time. What awaited them on the other side? Were they finally free, or had they unwittingly stepped into something worse? Breath quickened again. Rachel teetered on the edge as the light flashed, revealing an unknown realm behind the door. And just as quickly, her grip on Italo and Sophie tightened, her heart filled with as much resolve as fear. "What's next?" she whispered, staring into the blinding light, not sure if they were stepping toward salvation or their doom. The brilliance of the light enveloped them, wrapping around like a warm blanket, a stark contrast to the biting cold of the darkness they just fled. Rachel squinted, desperate to see beyond the blinding glow. It felt surreal, almost peaceful. Was it a trick? Were they truly safe? Suddenly, the light shifted, revealing jagged shapes around them. Towering walls, slick and black like obsidian, stretched high into the void above. The remaining glow seeped through fissures, casting long, eerie shadows that danced at the periphery of their vision. "What is this place?" Italo breathed, incredulity wavering in his voice. Sophie clung to Rachel's waist, her skin pale under the oppression of uncertainty. "Mommy," she whispered, eyes wide, tracing the shadows with her gaze. Rachel's heart thudded louder than ever. "I don't know. But we can't stay still. We need to keep moving," she managed, her voice wavering. The calm was too strange, too deceptive. As they stepped forward, the ground beneath them shifted smooth but unsettling, like walking on a living surface. Each footfall felt like a heartbeat, reverberating through the strange space. The whispers returned, echoing off unseen walls. "Come closer, stay with us." The voices coalesced into a singular, chilling chant that both soothed and terrified. "Stay away!" Rachel cried, forcing herself to look around. The voices, once alluring, now came from all directions, spiraling into her mind like a wicked wind. "We need to find a way out." Then, a flicker of movement caught her eye, figures, shadowy and blurred, darting just beyond her focus. Were they friendly? Or more monstrous faces from her nightmare? "Mommy, I don't like this." Sophie whimpered, her small hands tightening into fists. "It'll be okay," Rachel forced a smile, even though dread pooled in her stomach. "We're going to find a way home." But ahead, the walls began to pulsate as though breathing, contracting and expanding, as if they were alive and aware. The shadows crept closer, beginning to form silhouettes that brought a bitter chill to the air. "We can play forever," one of the shapes lured, its voice dripping with mock innocence. "No!" Italo shouted, his panic igniting. "Not again." Rachel felt cold hands trace the nape of her neck as she turned, a shiver gripping her spine. "Keep moving. Don't look back." Each step felt like an uphill battle, her legs dragging against the strange terrain. Footfalls echoed behind them, heavy and distorted. The creatures detached from the shadows, spilling forth, twisted and grotesque, taking shapes that should never exist. Rachel's breath hitched as fear took shape in the gangly forms. "Why won't you play with us?" Another voice whined, crawling into her mind like an itch that wouldn't go away. "Run. Just run." Rachel shouted, her voice breaking as terror surged. They surged forward, breathless, hearts hammering. She could feel the pull of the darkness behind them, a visceral hunger nipping at their heels. Suddenly, the shimmer ahead widened, revealing another passage. It pulsed like living flesh. "Mommy, no!" Sophie's scream pierced the air, but there was no choice. They had to leap toward the unknown. There was no other option. They dove into the opening, the world shifting around as darkness clutched at their backs, desperate to claim them. Again, silence. But this time, it wasn't peaceful. The air felt heavy, charged. Rachel opened her eyes slowly, adjusting to the dim atmosphere. A mist lay thick like a weight on her chest. Where were they now? Were they still in the realm of the whispers? A glance at Italo and Sophie showed eyes wide with fear, mirroring her own, and then, the familiar haunting laughter began once more, curling around them like smoke, dense and suffocating. It felt like an omen, a warning too late. "What do they want?" Rachel murmured, dread pooling in her stomach as she looked around, realizing the shadows weren't gone. They lingered, biding their time. A sound, a rustling behind them, shifted the tension. "You think you escaped? Come join the fun." Rachel's heart sank. As the shadows began to coalesce into familiar shapes, she realized they hadn't left the danger behind at all. Was this their endless game of survival? Or had they unwittingly stepped into something darker? The laughter crescendoed, and in that moment, Rachel understood it was only just beginning. The mists swirled, thick and oppressive, wrapping around them like a shroud. Rachel glanced at Italo, his eyes darting back and forth, desperate. Sophie clutched her mother's leg, a fragile anchor in the swirling dread. "Stay close," Rachel murmured, though her own voice trembled. She could feel the air crackle with something ancient, something alive. Shadows loomed, their forms shifting, stretching toward them, mocking their fear. "They're here," Italo whispered as the laughter rose again, that chilling mirth that echoed off the walls, reverberating in her bones. It was laughter that felt less like joy and more like a taunt, a challenge. Rachel swallowed, feeling bile rise in her throat. "We have to find a way out," she insisted, a whisper of resolve flaring inside her. The shadows shifted again, their movements fluid as if they were part of the mist itself. "Look!" Sophie pointed, her voice a small beacon in the thick fog. "That way." She indicated a dimly lit path, the ground beneath it showing a faint glimmer. It was a stark contrast to the bleakness surrounding them. "Should we?" Italo began, but Rachel cut him off. "We have no choice." Rachel took a tentative step forward, pulling Sophie along. Each step felt heavier as the shadows swirled around, whispering sweetly yet chillingly, coaxing her to stay, to surrender. They hungered for her like hungry ghosts craving warmth. The path narrowed, flanked by grotesque shapes. They elongated and then twisted, blending with the shadows that chased them. The whispers grew louder, filling her head with disjointed phrases, each more sinister than the last. "Leave her, join us forever, you belong." Each seductive word forged chains of dread on her mind. "No!" Rachel shouted unexpectedly. The shadows recoiled, if only for a moment. "We're not yours." Her own voice felt foreign, filled with unyielding fear and determination. Suddenly, she halted. Liquid darkness pooled at their feet, creeping closer, hungry to snare them. "We need to move," she urged, panic flipping her stomach. Racing ahead, they stumbled through the mist. The glimmering path twisted unexpectedly, leading them deeper into the gloom. Rachel fought back tears. "We're going to be okay, right?" she mumbled, as much to herself as to them, but the laughter shifted, morphing into something darker, an evil symphony that teased the edges of her sanity. It began to shape words, echoing around them. "You can't escape, play with us forever." Was there a way out? Shadows loomed larger, forming faces twisted in malicious glee. Other children? Adults? Their features melted into one another, grains of darkness soaking into a sea of despair. "Hey! Help!" Italo shouted, voice cracking. Was he calling for the vague shapes? Was he hoping for salvation? Rachel felt the shadows closing in. Bulbous eyes glowed amidst the mist, but they weren't the eyes of hope. They promised only fear. A wall of darkness loomed ever closer. She felt a crush of despair. This isn't freedom, she murmured under her breath, and then, she spotted at an opening, a bright fissure off in the distance, pulsating faintly, alive. Over there. She yelled, urgency snapping into every shred of her resolve. Mommy, they're coming. Sophie screamed, her voice higher, filled with young terror. Run! Rachel shouted, lunging forward. She pushed Sophie along, Italo falling in behind. The shadows chased them, brushing against the edges of their heels, slick and cold, like fingers of the dead reaching out. The laughter turned to wails, the shadows screaming as they pressed against the light, longing yet seething with rage. As they sprinted toward the fissure, the whispers twisted into howls of fury. You will return. You can't escape your fate. With one last desperate burst of speed, Rachel hurled herself toward the light, pulling her daughter through as Italo crashed behind them. The air whooshed, revealing darkness once more, but this time they fell into the light, colliding into a freezing ground. Dazed, Rachel glanced back. The fissure flickered and shrank, shadows clawing futilely at its edges. It was a race. Against time. Where had they landed? Was this another trap? The darkness tugged at her, wrapping its tendrils around her thoughts. The eerie calm returned, but it felt different. More suffocating. Sophie gasped, Mommy, I feel them. Rachel turned, dread gripping her heart as she noticed the new shapes forming in the distant gloom. What have we walked into this time? Just as the laughter began anew, Rachel realized it was only the beginning of their worst nightmares. The air around them grew dense, thick with an impending dread as the shadows twisted and contorted into shapes that clawed at the edges of Rachel's resolve. She blinked, desperately trying to clear the fog of confusion in her mind. Hold on tight, kids, she said, her voice shaking but firm. She turned to Sophie and Italo, their faces pale against the oncoming dark. Where are we, Mommy? Italo whispered, clutching his sister's hand. A knot tightened in Rachel's throat. She didn't know if this place was worse than the last, or if they'd ever find a true escape from those whispers that followed them like a relentless shadow. But retreating was no option. We need to find anything to give us a chance. She glanced around, searching for a beacon of hope, something that would break this cycle of horror. But darkness clung to them as if alive, wrapping around her limbs, urging her to succumb to despair. Then, a flicker caught her eye. In the distance, glowing faintly amidst the fog, there was a shimmer much like the light they had chased before. There. She pointed, her heart pounding with renewed urgency. Come on. They moved forward, the ground trembling underfoot, sending ripples of an unseen force cascading through the air. Each step brought them closer, but also deeper into the grip of fear. The laughter had become a manic crescendo, filling her ears with an electric hum that threatened to drown her out. Hurry! Rachel urged, the warmth of her children's hands grounding her amid the chaos. As they drew near, the light revealed itself to be a door, old and weathered but glowing with a tranquil warmth that felt like a promise. The whispers morphed into soft murmurings, soft enough to almost understand, as if inviting them for one last game, one last chance to give in. Rachel gritted her teeth and pushed against the pull of their voices. No! She shouted, tearing through the threshold of doubt, determination coursing through her. We are not yours. Just before reaching the door, tendrils of darkness lunged out, coiling around her legs, but with a fierce tug, she tore them away, clutching her children tightly. She felt the weight of despair pressing down but drew strength from the warmth of her children's love, the visual of their innocence pushing her forward. Together. Rachel shouted, holding Italo and Sophie's hands tightly as they broke into a run. They raced toward that glimmering door, the shadows snapping at their heels. The swirling chaos behind them became a cacophony of desperate pleas for them to join. Every step forward was a step away from the void that wanted to swallow them whole, and then, just as they reached for the door, it swung open, revealing a blinding light that washed over them with a wave of hope. Rachel didn't hesitate, she dashed forward, shielded by the light, and the three of them tumbled into the unknown. They landed in a field of golden corn, the fragrance of fresh earth surrounding them a stark contrast to the shadows they'd just escaped. Rachel looked around, her heart racing in disbelief as laughter hung in the air, bright and genuine, not born from malice but joy. "We're free." Italo stuttered, bewildered. Sophie looked up at the sky, her eyes glittering with wonder. "Mommy, look." She pointed, and Rachel followed her gaze upward. The sun shone down, illuminating everything, filling her heart with warmth. But this place felt different. It felt real, tangible, untouched by the shadows. The whispers receded, lost to the wind, as the horizon stretched out before them, full of possibilities, not horror. They could hear the cheerful sounds of children playing somewhere in the distance, the air thick with the promise of safety. Rachel's heart swelled. There was light after darkness, a new beginning. She knelt down and gathered her children in a tight embrace, tears of relief spilling from her eyes. "We did it. We made it." A weight lifted from her chest like the lifting of a storm cloud, releasing the warmth of sunlight into her bones. As they stood there, the world around them transformed into an idyllic scene, their struggles behind them, the darkness vanquished. But even as the sun shined bright and the future looked promising, Rachel knew, deep down, they would always carry the shadow with them. Would the memories remain? Would the whispers ever truly die? She felt an unsettling flicker of doubt. Would they ever truly be free? But today was not for pondering shadows. Today was for healing, for rebuilding, for hope. With her children by her side, Rachel took a deep breath, feeling the soft breeze cut through the remnants of fear still lingering within her. In that moment, she knew they would face whatever came next. With love and resolve, they ventured forward together, ready to shape a future free from haunting echoes, and so they walked into the sunlight, hand in hand, determined to carve their path, no longer haunted but hopeful. This was their beginning. Now that you've experienced this thrilling conclusion, you need to subscribe immediately to our channel so you don't miss the next exclusive stories packed with adrenaline and chills. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm and keep the good vibes rolling. Flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about this ending. What do you think happened to Rachel, Italo, and Sophie after their escape? And don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Only true fans understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.